have this conversation early because if EC is important to you, have that conversation with the caregiver and use that information, use what they tell you to decide what you're going to do next. Do you want to invest 30, $40,000 of your money into a caregiver that is just not interested in supporting your baby as a complete child? Hello, friends. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Heather, your EC Mama Bestie, and I'm here to show you how you too can naturally potty train your baby from as early as birth. This week, I want to talk about an issue that has come up a number of times over on Instagram, and that is about why we chose an au pair instead of daycare for our children. This has been kind of a hot button issue over on my page, and a lot of people have this very mistaken, misled idea that having an au pair means that I am privileged, I can afford an au pair, we have more money than other people, and therefore somehow we have an advantage to be able to do EC with our daughter. And I just want to explain to you that there were so many factors that went into our decision to choose an au pair and why we chose that. For one, when I was making the decision about what kind of childcare to have for my daughter, I had a toddler. He was 20 months old. I was pregnant with my daughter. She was due in a few months. And my partner and I were separated at the time. And we had no intentions of getting back together. If you know our story, you know that we did get back together after my daughter was born, but that was not the plan at the time. And so I was working full time as a professional architect at that point. I was single handedly supporting myself and my two children on my own. There's a whole lot that goes into that. And I needed childcare. And so I needed to find full time, we're talking like 50 plus hours a week, childcare for my two children, and we do not have any family that lives nearby. All of our family is very far away, so we did not have the luxury of having grandparents or cousins or aunts or uncles anywhere nearby to help out. We needed to pay for childcare for two kids. And in my area where I live, it was actually quite a bit more expensive, significantly more expensive to put two children in full time daycare than it was to have an au pair. And we have a three-bedroom house, which is not uncommon and does not make us significantly more wealthy than most people. And so we chose to use one bedroom for our au pair, give up a guest bedroom that would have allowed family to come and visit us. And we basically converted a closet into my daughter's very, very tiny nursery that fits basically a chair and her crib and blocks off access to our closet. I, at the time, made adjustments that I needed to make in order to be able to provide care for my children so that I could continue to work and provide for my family. And a lot of people will see, like, oh, you have an au pair, you must be super wealthy. At the time, I was a single mom of two. I was trying to prepare for my daughter's birth, prepare my home for an au pair coming to stay with us, pay the program fee up front, and I basically just had to put it on a credit card. I couldn't afford daycare any more than I could afford an au pair, but I did what I had to do to provide for my children. And so I just want to remind you that you don't know what other people are going through. And it's really important to have a non judgmental and open mind when it comes to understanding other people's reasoning. That said, we are now almost 2 years into our au pair's stay with us. And looking back, I'm so, so glad that we did this. Even though my partner ended up coming home after my daughter was born, she had a very traumatic birth and nearly died, and was actually taken away from us in the beginning and taken to a NICU in another hospital 30 miles away from where she was born. So I was left in one hospital and she was 30 miles away, and I had just had an emergency C-section. And my partner, who had just come back for the birth, we had not been together at all before then. He came home, took me to the hospital, and we experienced this birth together and found ourselves thrown back together in the postpartum unit of the hospital with our daughter 30 miles away. And that was a big wake up call for us. And we had a lot of questions about our daughter's health and whether she would be normal, whether she would even survive, and if she did survive, whether she would be developmentally normal and able to do things the same way that other children would. And the neurologist that came to speak with us at the time said that the best thing that you can do for your daughter is to give her a healthy and stable home to grow up in. That was a rude awakening for us, especially given all of the conflict that had been going on up until that time that had led to our separation to begin with, and then all of the difficulty that my son was experiencing of having to go back and forth between households as we were separated for 6 months while I was pregnant with my daughter. And we made the very difficult but somewhat easy decision to try again. And so we did decide to try again, and he moved back in with us, and we've been rebuilding a life together since then. But even with him home, I am so, so glad that we chose to have an au pair. I'm going to explain to you why we had an au pair and some of the reasons that I love it and I would do it again in a heartbeat, because this might help you make the decision also. First and foremost, one of the reasons that we chose having an au pair was that we had tried daycare with our son. We did it for about a month when he was about 20 months old, and he hated it. He cried every single day. He never got comfortable with it, and he couldn't talk at the time, but he was trying to tell me that this was not working and he did not feel safe. And eventually I decided, you know what? I understand that, and I pulled him out. We then did a nanny share for a while, and so it was him and another little boy at another family's home, and they had a nanny that took care of both of them. And that worked for a little while, but then with 2 kids and my daughter coming, we decided to go with the au pair. Another thing that was a big problem with daycare was that my son was getting sick constantly. He attended daycare for, I think, maybe a week, and then got sick and came home for a few days, got better enough to go back, promptly got sick again, came home, repeat, repeat. There were days that they could not accept us because they were out of ratio and someone was not there, and they just said, "Sorry, we don't have room for your son today." And I'm like, "I'm paying you money and I still have to go to work. What am I supposed to do?" And they said, "Well, you can wait in the parking lot until she arrives." Y'all, that is not the solution. And so it was unreliable. For one, we needed a solution that was reliable and flexible. And so having an au pair solved both of those problems. We also kind of eliminated the stress of having to rush our children out the door in the morning and get everybody ready at a certain time, get everybody up at a certain time. And so having an au pair in our home was amazing because it allowed our kids to sleep as long as they needed to sleep. I could leave while they were still asleep or they were eating breakfast, and our au pair was there to take care of them and get them when they got up. And so that was really helpful not to have to rush them out the door constantly. Everybody stayed well much more often because everybody was at home in our own home. And most importantly, our daughter, I went back to work at 8 weeks. My daughter was a tiny, tiny infant at that point. And so I did not feel good about sending her to daycare that at that age, given that I was working full time and would be gone 8 to 10 hours a day. And so I also had the opportunity to work from home in the beginning, and then later had a hybrid schedule where I was in the office 3 days a week and at home 2 days a week. And so I was able to see her and breastfeed her during the day because I was home and she was home. And so that helped us to continue our breastfeeding relationship. I got to see her during the day, she got to see me during the day. So that was really good for all of us from a bonding and emotional well-being standpoint. And also, she bonded with our au pair as well and felt really safe and comfortable in her own home. And so our au pair now has been with us almost 2 years. My daughter's almost 2 years old, and she sees her like another member of the family. I don't know what we're going to do when she leaves, but she absolutely sees her as another member of our family and does not feel that she is a stranger or somebody who's coming and going or somebody who's not consistent. That consistency throughout has been amazing. And also, the daycare that my son was at had sent him home with poop in his diaper 4 times in a row on 4 different occasions. And the first time it happened, I was kinda like, "Huh, that's not great," and I just changed him in the parking lot. and went on about our business. Then it happened again the next day, and I was like, "Huh, okay." So then I said something to them about it on the 3rd day, and I said, "This is happening. I think it's kind of odd because if he's pooping in his diaper, like, there's no way that you're not noticing that this is happening. Please change his diaper," because he was coming home with a rash, and he was getting rashes, and he had never had rashes before at home. And keep in mind, he was 20 months old here. My daughter is currently 20 months old, and she's fully potty trained. And she's been fully potty trained since about 14 months. So my son, who was entirely physically capable of recognizing his urge and sitting on the potty, but we never did EC with him, and we didn't know. And we hadn't even started potty training him at that point. If you are enjoying this content so far, you are learning something, please be sure to go ahead and hit that like button, leave me a comment, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. That really helps my channel to grow and reach more families with this information just like yours. If you want to learn more about EC and you're just getting started, I do have a free quick start guide that you can download down below in the description box. When I think about how independent my daughter is now and how capable she is from having done EC with her, and I try to imagine her in that situation, being in daycare with basically strangers, just ignoring the fact that she's pooped on herself, letting her sit in it, the shame is unfathomable, and the fact that that is happening, I'm sure that my son is not the only one that that's happened to. If that's happened to you, let me know in the comments, I'm really curious. But it was just this consistent negligence, and so after I said something the first time, then it happened again a 3rd day, and I said something again, and it just kept happening, and by the time it happened the 4th time, I was done. I was like, I'm out. I can't do this anymore." And so then we looked for another option and we got him into the nanny share. But having said all that, I think it's really important that you choose the option for childcare that is best for your child and not necessarily the one that's most convenient for you. There are benefits to having a child in daycare, like they're going to be around other kids and they're going to get socialized and they're going to learn how to share and all of those things. But there's drawbacks too. And I think it's really important to consider everything in context with your child's personality and how they thrive best. It's also really important if you are doing EC to have a conversation with your child's caregiver early on before you even commit to that facility. My child is accustomed to pooping in the potty. My child knows how to recognize that urge in their body and let you know. Are you going to be able to help them? Are you going to be able to take them to the potty 1, 2, 3 times a day? How often are you going to be able to involve with this? And unfortunately, I have heard stories from so many people who say their daycare just flat out refuses to support it at all. They cite reasons like, "It's policy that we just don't start potty training until they're 2 or 3 years old. This classroom doesn't do it. This classroom doesn't have access to a toilet, and we can't, by state regulation, potty them in an open potty because of hygiene purposes," or "The nearest toilet is down the hallway in the big kids' room, and it wouldn't be possible for us to take them there." Have this conversation early, because if EC is important to you, and I think it should be given everything that I've shared here and all of the reasons why we've talked about that this is valuable for your child, have that conversation with the caregiver and use that information, use what they tell you to decide what you're going to do next. Do you want to invest $30,000, $40,000 of your money? That's, US at this time, but do you want to invest that money into a caregiver that is just not interested in supporting your baby as a complete child? And if not, consider other options. And so I really appreciated that we had an au pair and that we chose to invest in that option, which, I'm still paying that off. I literally had to put that on a credit card at the time. It wasn't something that I could afford. I couldn't afford daycare either, and that also would have gone on our credit card. And obviously, we're in a different situation now than we were then, but it's not always cut and dry. And so when childcare is a significant portion of your total income and potentially more than your rent or your mortgage, this is very common in the United States right now, then you really want to make sure that you're choosing the option that is best for your child, period. And so If the child's caregiver is not interested in supporting EC at all, maybe consider other options. And so with our having an au pair, yes, she was taking care of 2 potty training at the same time, because our son was also potty training concurrently around he started around 26 months, a few months after she arrived, and 1 month after my daughter arrived. Our pair was caring for 2 potty training children at the same time. And you know what? She did a phenomenal job because we taught her what to do. We taught her our daughter's signals. We showed her how to potty her. We showed her the rhythms and routines that we used when we were caring for her, when we were home, and she learned and she was willing to try. And of course, she used diapers. We all used diapers as a backup, but that wasn't the default toilet. That wasn't just the assumed way that the child was going to poop. We were all actively paying attention to the signals. We were actively offering consistently according to the routine that we had established in our household that our daughter had come to expect. And yes, our au pair was an intrinsic part of our success with EC. Does that mean that you have to have an au pair, you have to have an in-home nanny to be successful with this? No, it doesn't. And if your daycare is flat out refusing to support EC and that is your only option, I still would encourage you to try EC at home when you are with your baby because it's still going to have the benefit of introducing your baby to the potty early on, which is going to have benefits later on when you do start to potty train. Are you going to get to the finish line faster if you have the ability to have your baby in childcare where their EC needs are supported? Of course that's going to happen. But it doesn't mean that if your child is in childcare that you shouldn't even try EC. I really encourage you to try it regardless, but also have the conversation with your caregiver and make your decision accordingly. If EC is important to you, find a caregiver that's going to support that. There are always other options. There are always ways around something. So if you are considering an au pair, I highly recommend it. It's definitely worth looking into. There were some additional costs that we did not anticipate that were kind of background costs beyond just the weekly stipend that we pay her and the program fee that we pay the agency. So, for example, you are providing them a room in your home. So there's a slight increase in things like the water bill and the electricity, and you're also expected to provide them a phone for use in the United States, but that's a couple $100 a year. It's not really a big deal. That wasn't a huge expense. We also provide her with a train card, so she has access to use the train and public transportation, and we do pay for that, but that is, again, it's a relatively small expense in the grand scheme of things, and it's far cheaper than adding her to our car insurance. So she has access to the train that she can use when she needs. And then I think the biggest expense that surprised me was just paying for groceries, buying groceries for a third adult. Because when you have 2 adults and children just don't really eat as much as the adults do, and that's not that big of a deal. But feeding a third adult does add up, especially in the landscape of food costs the way that they are now. As far as cost-wise, it can absolutely still be cheaper to have an au pair than 2 children in full-time daycare when they only give you usually like a 10% discount on the second or third child. Keep in mind too that an au pair can take care of as many children as you have. You're not being charged per child. You pay for the au pair, that's it. So if you just had 1 child, it's probably still more cost effective to have a daycare situation or a nanny. But if you have 2 or more children, highly recommend you look into getting an au pair. This is not a matter of privilege. This is not a matter of affordability or wealth. This is an option to everyone, and you should absolutely do what's best for your child. All right, so I hope that this story slash information about having an au pair is helpful to you. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next week.